Going around, boom, according to that, I'm live. Welcome. This is Tokyo Tonight. My name is Yuko Simon. Good to see you again this week. Once again, I'm going to be a little bit quiet. Although I think last week I was really actually peaking too much on the audio, so hopefully this will be better. This is my new camera. It is this thing right here, Insta360 Link. I just got it during this week. I'm still learning to play with it. This is the first time I'm streaming with it, so tell me any impressions. I've totally taken down the DSLR setup that I had before. It was kind of big and bulky. I like just having the camera here on the monitor. It's easier to talk to. I can tell you that I can, for example, show, is this going to cause tech problems if I turn on and off the C922. So for example, for a regular web camera like the Logitech that everyone uses, the C922, this is what I normally look like, and it's actually not so bad. It's a little bit, looks a bit washed out, but you know, this is the normal camera. But this is the with the Insta360, you know, better color. It's a lot sharper. You can see a lot more, and yeah, it's very, very cool. So anyway, that's a new thing. Got a bunch of stories this week. Some of you may have noticed if you follow me on Twitter, I actually had the privilege of sorts of being called out directly by Taro during the week. Taro specifically called me out on the way that I was referring to his name, which was interesting. He became the digital minister. Of course, the new cabinet got announced. Not normally very interesting, honestly, and I don't think I even have a news story about it in here, although I guess I'll talk about that partly when I talk about him and what his new role is, but that's always an interesting one. Great to see so many people already rolling in. Yeah, we've just had a typhoon. It still has been crazy hot. He still can't really travel into Japan normally yet. There's still all sorts of things going in. I'm looking at the screen, not the lens. So the lens is here. Tracy Northcote. Oh, good to see you, Tracy Northcote. I recognize you from Twitter. Here's the camera. Normally I am looking at the screen and I'm seeing what's going on. So yeah, I'm looking directly into a light if I look this way, but I should. Sometimes I will break the fourth wall. Yeah, I'll show you some tricks with this camera a bit later on as well. Yeah, let's rock in and see who's already in the comments and say hello to everyone, because that's something that I love to do here every week. So first of all, PB, boom, first in there we've got Yoni. Good to see you. A man from Finland who's currently in Japan. We've got Quentin Ranked, excellent to see you. Excellent to see Dan H as always. Kerberos Tenshi, good to see you. Is it Tonga time? It's TT time. Well, could be Tonga time. Talofa. Talofa's Samoan, isn't it? Yeah, anyway. I shouldn't get those mixed up, but good to see you nonetheless. One Johnson, great to see you. Tracy Northcote. Yeah, great to have you in here. Actually, I think I saw you tweeting, responding to my tweets today. So yeah, always nice to see new people commenting. December Clouds, you took a photo of a New Zealand t-shirt at the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham just for me. Oh, cool. Oh, really? I don't know. Show me the photo. I'd love to see, actually. I must admit, I was just before the. It's starting to dawn on me that I'm like now, like a month away from flying back to New Zealand. And I was just thinking about that. Like, so for me, it's really weird. I'm going back, but I'm not going back. Like, my dad has moved to New Zealand, but he's in a part of New Zealand I've never lived in and never visited before. And I'll be going through Auckland, but you know, Auckland's where I lived before, but even Auckland I haven't lived in since 1998. I mean, it's getting close to like Back to the Future timelines. It's getting close to like, you know, time traveling, going back there. So I was just actually looking and saying, hey, like, I mean, it's weird if I go through Auckland Airport, as I'll need to do when I transfer to a domestic flight. I was just looking up, can I buy like New Zealand t-shirts? I was literally looking at that because, you know, I was thinking I need to stock up. I'm wearing an All Blacks one now, but I haven't lived there for like 23 years. So it's weird. My accent is obviously, it's not an American accent, but it isn't a New Zealand accent anymore. My New Zealand mannerisms, such as I have them, they're in there, but I've kind of turned them all off. So I know that's going to be really, it's going to be really weird going back. I mean, I've been back a couple of times, but yeah, but I must admit, I still New Zealand is like a big sports team to me, so I'm totally going to be looking for like All Blacks merchandise and New Zealand T-shirts and stuff to buy to bring back to Japan, probably just to remind me that is what my passport says. So yes, I'm definitely into seeing a picture of a New Zealand T-shirt from the Birmingham Commonwealth Games. So yeah, I don't know if I've ever mentioned this actually, but my dad. So when he left the army, he actually, well, his first job was he was CEO of the Commonwealth Games in Auckland. That was his first job out of the army. He was in the army for a long time. So yeah, I actually have a close family connection and fondness for the Commonwealth Games. Actually, I actually got to see my dad working on it from scratch, and it's a huge undertaking. I couldn't even comprehend how big it would be for the Olympics, seeing how big it is just for the Commonwealth Games, which is of course the former British Empire, excluding America. But yeah, pretty cool that they had it in Birmingham anyway. So yeah, I'd love to see that. New camera indeed. Andrea Moboy, good to see you. Yes, the butter emoji, the AI overlords are saying that we cannot have butter. Yeah, which I must admit is pretty aggravating if I think about it too much. So I'm not going to think about it. Got the J vlog in here. Hey everyone. We've got Tokyo 503 waving, Andrea Moboy waving. We've got Yoni has laundry and dishes to do. So yes, definitely play this in the background to try not to fall asleep while you're doing the dishes listening to me. Shubhas, our man from Panama, or woman actually. I don't know. I think you've said that you're a man before, but I hate this about English. I hate in English that we need pronouns. You don't need them in Japanese. They don't use pronouns in Japanese. So you just call someone something san, and it doesn't become a problem until you speak English, which to me is a flaw with our language. But anyway, good to see you. Good to have our Panama representative in here. Good morning. Buenos dias. Good to have you with us. We've got PB somewhere in the Hikoverse. There's a mustachioed bodybuilding Hiko Simon. A fan of lard, not butter. I like lard. Who continues to use a Microsoft LifeCam? Well, at work, I still use LifeCam. I'm a big fan. I've got one right here. Hooked up. Oh, I can't. It's hooked on something. I can't show it right now. I love the LifeCam. I actually, I am a loyal user of it. I prefer it way more than the Logitech camera, actually. But no one else in the world seems to like it. I like that it swivels around easily. But and I like the colors on it, even though they're totally fake. So yeah, I'm a fan. You know me well, PB. Mr. Cordy Chap, excellent. Glad that you made it. Oh, that suddenly jumped. I just did a little bit of a scroll wheel and it jumped. Let's go back and find. Yeah, Tracy Northcote asking, am I looking at the screen? I'm generally looking at the screen, although when I don't need to look at the screen, I'll look at you in the camera. Nice to see you there, by the way. Yes, we've got Theodore Sharp. Good to see you. Welcome. Shinjuku Gochome. Congratulations on my quote tweet from Colonel Taro. Yes, we'll be getting to that. I've always felt like, no, when you're speaking a language, you should follow the conventions of the language, including with names, and they shouldn't carry over from culture. Even though I believe me, I'm as culturally assimilated as anyone can really be. But yeah, and I've always fought back against the idea of using Japanese name order in English because I think it's confusing. But I must admit, I was taken down impressively by the digital minister on Twitter. So I'll talk about that, and I guess I feel obliged to change my position on that. So we'll see how it goes. But Shinjuku Gochome, it's excellent to have your handle in the chat. So thank you for joining. Yeah, Theodore Sharp looking good. Thank you, Andrew Moboy. Heading off. I know it's always late for you, so see you all next week. Thank you for popping in. I do appreciate it. Andrew Moboy, we've got Sainted Sir. It's 9:43 in the morning in NYC. Well, good morning, NYC. Hope you're having a lovely day there. Hope it's not too hot. Yeah, moving house, all sorts of stuff going on there with Andrea Moboy. We've got Believe in Yourself. Good morning, good evening. I think good morning for you, right, in Canada. Good to have you with us. We have Cobras Tenchi with too many emojis. The AI just freaked out on that, obviously. Tracy Northcote, oh my God, your father was the chief marshal for the Brisbane Commonwealth Games in '82, was brought over from the army. Well, there you go. That's similar. My dad came over from the army and was CEO of the 1990 Auckland Commonwealth Games. Yeah, and it's essentially, I mean, I guess it must be a good job for army people. It's essentially logistics, right? It's managing a lot of people and a lot of things and getting a lot of things set up on a schedule. It's a very good sort of a thing. It makes sense for army people. It might not be intuitive. Maybe they know that army people are good at this sort of thing and they look for people for those sorts of roles. But that's super cool. Well, snap, we have something in common, Tracy Northcote. And yeah, that's very, very cool. Brisbane Commonwealth Games '82, and they're doing the Olympics there soon. Man, that's gonna be a big deal. Going down, male, not changing gender. Hey, it's all good, Shubis, but yeah, that's what I was assuming. Sorry. I suddenly realized, God, what if I'm making a mistake, which is terrible, but also such a hassle. Like, but pronouns are even bigger, I guess, in Spanish than they are in English. So yes, I'd love to actually go. Yeah, I really miss speaking Spanish. Actually, it's what I did before I spoke Japanese. Continuing to scroll down, we've got Dan H. At me, it will always be Taro Kono to us, although it seems like he's America's man in the Japanese cabinet, who they want to make future PM. Oh, that's interesting. I had no idea that America had a specific favorite or position, but yeah, he is very internationalized. Um, I don't know. I mean, he's got no real factional power or influence. So even if the US backs him, I don't know that that makes any sort of a difference. And frankly, I don't know if it's very smart for the US to back him. But he is eccentric, and frankly, he's the person who I backed. And I think actually polls showed he was the popular choice for the PM election, although he didn't have the numbers, obviously, because he's not backed by a large faction, although even Kishida isn't as well. But the key is they got the support of the Abe faction and the Aso factions in particular for that. So, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I do think he's very much of the Koizumi mold. And again, I'll talk about Taro Kono Taro, as I mockingly called him and got called out on later on in the show. And more boy, Mr. Cordy Chip, because Simon got hanging on the wall a brown seahorse behind me. That's a Himato. That's a Maori fishing hook. That's something that's literally like when I should go to New Zealand. I want to buy New Zealand stuff. So yeah, the Himato. That's a basically a New Zealand thing. It's a ceremonial fishing hook used by Maori. And actually pretty common to a lot of Polynesian cultures. They have some version of that, but it's very common for New Zealanders to wear. I've actually got a proper, actually an antique, a whalebone heimato, which I wear, but that's a big one for the wall. I think heimato is the proper pronounce. AU as you pronounce or like that. But anyway, Eric Bailey, good to see you. I'm here. I can relax now. I can start. Thank you for letting us start, Eric. I'm glad that you made it. Dr. RB, yo, Hiko, yo, Dr. RB, glad that you made it. Good to have you in here. Wow, lots of people shutting me out. Try German pronouns because I'd rather not, Cobra Tenchi, but thank you for the invitation. And thanks for explaining. Thought it may have been indeed. Yeah, very, very happy to explain. That is all the catching up. Now, for everybody, you all know the drill. One, I love it when people say hello. Please say hello. It's great that there are 24 people watching at the moment. I think most people have said hello. I love it, even if you're shy, even if you're just lurking, even if it's like you're watching this recorded. Drop in a thing, hey from somewhere, because to me it's just really cool how incredibly global the show is. I'm always surprised at the places that people tune in from. And look, I'm trying to give you just a little bit of a taste of what's going on in Japan as if you're sort of living here. And if you are living here, I give you a little bit of an interpretation of all the stuff that's going on in the news that, from as someone who watches the news quite closely and has been talking about the news for the whole time that I've been here. Say hello. Click on the like button. It helps. I really appreciate it. And of course, if you haven't subscribed, clicking on the subscribe button, it does again help. These videos are not monetized. I do them for the fun of it. So that's the best way you can help and support the show is clicking on like and subscribe. So with that, the other thing is that those regular viewers know the drill. I'll go through a story, I'll talk about it, and then I will go into the comments and I will basically look for comments that are doing what Odie Jr. Baba just did. Boom, baba, boom. What Odie Jr. just did. If you say my name, Hiko Simon, you don't even have to put the @ mark. You just say Hiko Simon. It will flash orange, and I will scroll through, and my eyes will go like sharks with lasers mounted on their heads towards the orange, basically towards my name. Because it's a narcissistic tendency. I'll just go straight to the things that talk about me. And through that, you can make a comment, you can make a question, you can request a topic, you can do anything. You can just say hello, do what you like. Say Hiko Simon to get my attention. I would love to get your comments and thoughts through the show, as always. It's already 10:54. Damn, we haven't even started yet. Oh, and look at that. This has been a long intro. ELH, good to have you in here, ELH. Again, great to see a name I'm not familiar with. I am going to Cobra Tenchi. I need a bit more muscle, a bunch of tattoos. BTC Chiba, good to see you. Let's jump in. So first one from earlier in the week, there was this article that I saw, which was why are young people attracted to tiny 9-meter square apartments in central Tokyo. And this is a thing. There are, if you want to live in like Shibuya or Harajuku or some trendy neighborhood, and you want to be in the thick of it, where you can go out drinking and go home at 3 o'clock in the morning and not be stuck needing to catch a taxi because there's no trains left, or you want to live close to your university or wherever you work. It's pretty common when people leave their homes. And actually, it's the same thing. I felt this myself. I lived in a 19 square meter apartment as my first apartment, where I was living on my own in Japan. And yeah, I was kind of into the ideas, like going to a capsule hotel. It's like, I'm young, I'm cool, I'm hardcore, I can tough it out, live in a cramped space, and have a great life and do lots of interesting things. And it's only when you live in a place, even 19 square meters, I learned how, basically that's 19 square meters is not enough to fit a double bed into the room. I could fit a queen size bed in, which took up most of the room actually. And besides that, have enough room to cram in a refrigerator, a washing machine, and a toilet and a shower basically in the same room. In the same cramped, and that's all that you get in 19 square meters. So like in a 9 square meter apartment, that means you basically get it's literally what that photo is pretty much. It's a prison cell. You may or may not have a toilet. You probably don't have a shower. You certainly don't have any room to put a refrigerator or a washing machine. You'd be doing all your washing in a coin laundry. You'd probably be doing your bathing in a bathhouse. You'll probably be getting all of your food from a convenience store. Yeah, when you're a new graduate, and you're fresh in the world, you're young and you're stupid enough to think that you can do that, and you'll realize, and you know what, you'll do it, and it'll even be fun for even maybe even 2 or 3 months. You might be able to continue to see that it's fun. But I tell you, when you get like more than 6 months, and when you're working or doing whatever, and yeah, there's a reason that people over 25 never go for these apartments. And the fact that this article features a company run by like 30 and 35-year-olds to have a company that sell these to people in their early 20s, I feel like they're taking advantage. They are basically what dumbasses people under 25 are. Good on them, but this is basically like voluntarily living in a prison cell. Not uncommon. I know people have done this sort of thing. 9 meters is pretty extreme, but you can live in Shibuya for like, and frankly, the rents that they're talking about. Well, I guess to live in a really good neighborhood in a really good location, you might be able to get away with like $500 a month, or probably less than $500 a month. And I guess people are thinking that they don't have to spend money on the train. They're saving costs in other places, but it makes sense on paper. But when you actually have to live in the place, most of the things I learned about living in apartments in Japan, I learned from that first apartment, which is I'm never again going to live on the ground floor of an apartment building, because you have like random doorbell ringers and newspaper salespeople who are basically scammers. You get the religious cults, you get people punching on the walls from outside. And I was below road level, so I never had natural sunlight, which again gets to you after a long time. It's literally like living in a closet. So yeah, I took all of those lessons and I applied them. I think where I live now still isn't perfect, but it's the cumulative result of all of the mistakes I've made with apartments, and size was one of those things. So yeah, I'm always happy to share those. But that's it. It's part of the experience. I think part of how we grow up and learn is by making mistakes, like living in 9 square meter apartments. And it serves a certain purpose. If you really have no money and you really want to live in the middle of Roppongi or the middle of Shinjuku or the middle of Shibuya, these things exist. You'd be insane to go for one of them, but might be fun, especially if it's just for a few weeks. So those things are there. Into the comments. Great to see. We've got believe in yourself. The stars aligned. The hex has been acquired. A little more. The first stake will happen. I don't know what that means, but yes, I agree completely. The J vlog. Well, you were 20 minutes late. I was 20 minutes late. Well, I just started, so you got in here perfect timing. The J vlog. Atomic Tom. Small. Good to see you, Atomic Tom. We've got Christian Hugo. Wow, cool. Hey, because I'm a long time in South Africa. Always enjoy the recordings. Very cool that you're in South Africa. Must be actually not too early in the morning, middle of the day, right? Do I think that Article 9 will be amended? I've been wondering whether Japan would be able to aid Taiwan. Well, those are deep topics. I don't think Article 9, I think the Constitution is going to be, the reason the government is trying to figure out some innocuous way to change the constitution is that there are people who want to change Article 9, but they realize going straight for Article 9, like Abe wanted to do, is the public's not going to stand for it. And it requires, as well as 2/3 majority in both houses of parliament, it also requires a public referendum to amend the constitution. And the fact that the constitution has never been amended, even when Abe actually had a 2/3 majority in both houses, still, even with that, he never got enough momentum behind amending something in the constitution because there wasn't the public support for it. So clearly what the LDP has been trying to do is figure out a way that they can change the constitution in a way that they can at least get people used to the idea that the constitution can be changed. And I think that's a good thing. Most countries do normally periodically update their constitutions. But the threshold to change it is very high, and there isn't really any particular topic. They're trying to say now that the government needs special powers to be able to handle pandemics, for example. So they're looking for a way to change the constitution to give themselves extra pandemic management powers. But even that's kind of petered out. We've kind of gotten by with what we have. But Article 9, even if they figure out a test case to change the constitution, they're not going to use Article 9 for that. And they haven't even found the test case before going to Article 9. So I really think Article 9 is not going to be amended. That's me. Which brings into question, of course, so what happens if something happens with Taiwan? Well, during the Chinese Civil War, when the KMT, when the Kuomintang evacuated to Taiwan, Japan, of course, was under occupation at that time and no longer had a military. But unofficially, there were a lot of Japanese former Imperial Army and Navy advisors who secretly went down to Taiwan and advised the nationalists on basically digging in and defending Taiwan from the communists. So there's actually a history of kind of clandestine support for Taiwan from Japan. I mean, this is immediately during the Chinese Civil War. And obviously the US has been interested in using Japan to sort of bolster Taiwan as well. Japan, certainly there'll be a lot of indirect aid. Japan has always been a good friend, although, they've had to be very delicate with that relationship. But there are close ties between Japan and Taiwan. Also, the fact that Yonaguni Island in particular, which isn't disputed, the disputed islands are further away than Yonaguni, which is right off the coast of Taiwan, is right there, right? It would probably almost certainly be impacted by anything happening in Taiwan. I don't know. Japan would not be able to provide military aid to Taiwan. It would not be able to get into a war with China, but I think it would try to find ways to supply material and probably military aid. I mean, even with Ukraine right now, it's pushing the envelope on this. It's sending over bulletproof vests, which some people are arguing is still, breaching Japan's voluntary rules on not supplying military material to countries in combat and war. So Japan's pushing the envelope on it. I think Japan would provide, food, oil, supplies, economic support. It would accept refugees. It would do a lot to help Taiwan, I think, in a conflict. And it might unofficially do a lot more. Just the fact that, of course, that the Japan hosts most, of the U.S. presence in the West Pacific, right in Okinawa, right beside Taiwan, is really the most support that Japan can provide for Taiwan, which is, of course, contingent on America actually stepping up and doing something to protect Taiwan if it really is in a situation there. And that, by the way, that the presence of those US bases in Okinawa, while they are a terrible burden for Okinawa, they are the reason that Taiwan is still free. And I think that's while that's hard on Okinawa, it's the fact that South Korea and Taiwan are basically there because of those US bases in Okinawa. So Japan provides support in different ways, but I don't think Japan would ever get directly involved into a conflict with China to defend Taiwan, not in a shooting way, although it wouldn't otherwise. It's an interesting question. I'm going to leave it there for now. That's a very deep topic. I could go a lot of places with that. Kerberos Tenshi, when you lived in Nagasaki, you literally lived in a hole in the wall. It was barely long enough, feet didn't stick out. It was not a capsule hotel there. So yes, you can do it, but right, Kerberos Tenshi, I mean, you can vouch for me on this. You wouldn't want to live in that for a year, right? It'd start to feel like a prison cell, although they can work. But yeah, Theodore Sharp, they are taking advantage of them. It's pretty messed up. Yeah, well, they are. But there again, the dumbass kids are looking for a way that they can afford to live in Shibuya, and they find it, and they're creating those solutions. And everybody learns in life through making mistakes like this, and it's supply and demand, I guess. But I kind of agree. I don't think you should be allowed to sell apartments that are like less than. I mean, I lived in 19 square meters, and I really think that's like almost the smallest that you could consider habitable for one person. Short of like a dorm room. Below that, it really becomes like a dorm room. Um, yeah, I really think there should be a minimum size, and it should be bigger than 9 square meters. So I'm with you on that, Theodore Sharp. Dan H, this may not be very current news, but your thoughts on the privacy law that came to effect on 1st April 2022. Man, you keep asking me questions that affect my job. uh, well, so the privacy law did not come into effect in 1st of April. It was significantly amended in 1st of April 2022. And yeah, I've had to spend some time on the aspects of the amendment, which have changed my work. Like we've had to rewrite the privacy notice, and we've had to change some internal practices. But Japan's privacy law has been around since 2015 in its current form, I think. I can talk about Japan's privacy law. Man, I could do a whole show on that, but yeah, it's kind of like I have to talk about this and not talk about my current job, but I can talk about previous jobs. So just talking in general, Japanese privacy law, it may surprise some people that Japan actually has far stricter privacy laws than America does. And actually, some people think of GDPR and Europe as the high watermark on privacy and personal information. Of course, they have Germany, which had the Stasi spying on everybody. So there's reasons for sensitivity and why they have such stringent laws in Europe. But Japan, actually, Japanese, without necessarily having the Stasi and East Germany and that kind of history, anyone who lives in Japan knows that Japanese are like super paranoid about personal information handling, and it's partly based on culture and a belief in privacy, but it's also based on hard experience of data brokers selling information to the yakuza, and the yakuza using that to target people for scams and for loan sharking and stuff like that. People know those risks. So the principle behind the Japanese privacy law is on consent for everything. And you can't just imply that consent. You can't say that someone clicked the site, they must have they must have known that they would be sharing the information. You post a sign and it's buyer beware. No, you actually have to give affirmative consent in a lot of situations, which means a lot of apps. And a lot of data handling that you assume are okay if it meets standards of other countries, including Europe, must be okay for Japan. Actually, for Europe, Japan has adequacy under GDPR rules, which is that Europe recognizes that Japan's privacy laws are so tough that they are good enough to meet Europe's standards by default. They don't have to do anything. This is a problem because America does not have that, and that's where there's a big fight with Facebook and EU at the moment. I'm not going to go too much further on this, but yeah, if you're working in IT or making apps or making involved in providing information in Japan, it's a real challenge actually to comply with Japan's privacy law, and I think that's a good thing. It's not the same type of framework as the GDPR. It's not based on processes and controllers and having model clauses and contracts. It's actually simpler in that regard. It's not as prescriptive, but the principles are very high. You need explicit consent for everything. So yeah, it's an interesting law. It's tough to maintain compliance with, and most people would not be compliant with it by default. That gives me business. Well, not so much business, it gives me work because I work in-house. But yeah, it's so Dan H, also Ministry of Justice trying to force mainly foreign large tech companies into registration under the Company Act. I've heard registering due to administrative burden and cost maintaining the regulation. Yeah, it's not just the Ministry of Justice. I think the Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communications was trying to get IT companies to register under the Telecommunications Business Act. Again, that was just basically, and the hassle there is that in order to register under the Telecommunications Business Act, you have to have a business that's registered. You have to actually be registered as a company in Japan. That basically is a way that they can enforce, that they can get their hands on you if they don't want to. And mainly for, I think, tax reasons, a lot of foreign tech companies operate in Japan without actually having a local presence. Or they'll have a local presence, but it'll be separate from the actual, they'll be selling and providing business services from the overseas site, and they won't be registering using the local entity. And yeah, Japanese regulators, this is not just a trend in Japan, by the way. Indonesia, you haven't been able to play Fortnite. I think PayPal got shut down because they had a different law that did a similar thing. They required registration of foreign companies, so that basically they could enforce their own laws against those companies. And when they didn't, they cut off the internet to Epic Games and to a bunch of companies. Japan's not that extreme, but it's kind of similar. A lot of countries are now aware that there are a lot of big tech companies that are trying to operate from outside of their country in their country. And I think ultimately it comes down to tax. But before that, they're worried about the ability to enforce and not being able to enforce Japanese laws. I think domestic companies are complaining that they have to comply with these Japanese laws, and these foreign companies get away with not having to comply with them because they're not because they claim to be not operating in Japan, even though they are, and they're often beating Japanese companies in where they're competing. So I think it's a creeping way, and every country is doing this. Europe is doing this like crazy. The sort of trying to force them to localize, and what seems to be happening in the big tech space is that they're realizing that they can't operate from offshore. They need to operate locally, and that's happening. I can talk about that a little bit more because I didn't have to do that, but yes, I know about that problem and I've dealt with it. So yeah, that's actually a very good topic, Dan H, and that is my take on that. I think it's part of a trend. Ultimately, it's first for enforcement, but it's also basically to force them to localize their operations, which basically then makes it taxable. They're not quite as direct as Europe, saying, give us all your money now, and being very arbitrary and, mob-like. Japan's being a little bit more indirect than that, but ultimately, and Japan has a tax treaty with the US, so it's not such a big deal about the tax split. But ultimately, it's also probably, in the end of the day, also about making sure that they are doing their operations in Japan from Japan, and they're paying taxes in Japan, and they're accountable to laws in Japan. So this is the first step on that. And yeah, it looks like the regulators were a bit heavy-handed with how they pushed it, but I think it's reasonable enough. Japan's an important country to most of the companies that operate here. And that's right. I mean, and it's understandable that most of the big companies, they try to operate with the minimal necessary presence. They want to save costs, but in the end of the day, if you want to operate here, you got to be here to some extent, is my take. But I definitely again, I could probably tell you more about that in person than I can tell you on the show. But it's another interesting one. So good topic. Cobras Tenshi, you was very happy the moment you moved out of that hole. Indeed, you don't want to live in a 9-meter square apartment. I was very happy when I left my apartment. I lived in my apartment for 3 years, although it wasn't as small as that. But there you go. Plot twist, Dan H is a college of Hiko Simon. Indeed, he might just be. Aaron, great to see you. Wave, boom. Yes, indeed. Wow, Indiana State Fair. Go enjoy the Indiana State Fair. I'm jealous. That sounds like it'd be a lot of fun. They used to have those in Australia when I was a kid, or things like that. But I'm sure that they'd be even cooler in America. Dan H, I've recently been reading a blog about Japanese law and future problems of laws by Baker McKenzie. Oh, I know the folks at Baker McKenzie quite well. So yes, wow, okay. Well, hit me. Any topics you want to know? I've given seminars at Baker McKenzie for their clients on some of these sort of topics that you're probably interested in, actually. So that's getting very close to the world in which I live. Anyway, I'm going to keep going. We've only done one topic, and we've only got 20 minutes left, so I'm going to keep plowing through. I saw Prey, the Disney Plus hosted Predator sequel. Honestly, I kind of found the first Predator movie is a classic. It is a great movie. And I found, like it happens with most of these franchises, it just kind of gets kind of crap. And once it got to Alien versus Predator and everything, I just wasn't really into it anymore. I watched Prey, which for those of you who don't know, it's a straight to streaming. The 10th sequel or whatever sequel we're up to for Predator. And it's basically a woman Comanche in the 1700s fighting against the Predator. And I think there's a lot of it sounds like I didn't know anything about it other than I saw it was getting good reviews. So I thought, okay, I'll watch it. And I was worried that watching a Predator movie that has good reviews is just going to be very disappointing. I also learned when I was reading reviews after I watched it, that apparently there was a lot of debate generated by the idea that, this has just gone too woke. It's Native American women, fighting. It's like this is going to be politically correct Predator and ruin it. Well, I don't know how anyone could watch the movie and come out thinking that this movie was too woke. I mean, even if you think that the concept is woke, which is just stupid, like what's wrong with your brain? If you're worried about that, like how do you get any joy from life? I mean, Literally, if you think like that, then I would have to be the star of every movie that you watch, and I wouldn't even want to watch that. So it works. I didn't expect it to work, and I didn't expect it to work as well as it worked, but it worked. And I would say, I don't think it. And I tell you what, I've seen Comics Plus, Ako-san review it. And I don't know. I think it's actually, of all the Predator sequels, it's right up there with the original movie. It really is. It's good storytelling. It's just a good setting. They made it work really, really well. I was blown away, actually, that I did not think that movie could be good. So I gave it 8 out of 10. I think the hype about it is actually real. And no, I don't think it's just a token attempt at a woke Predator sequel. It's a good bit of storytelling and a very well shot movie. It's just really great, So that's my take on that movie. Setsuna, great to see you. You lived in a share house with 9 square meter room. Okay, that's a share house. So right, that was a single room, but okay, you had communal kitchens, a center-style bathhouse, and washing machines inside the building. Okay, so but you know what? So that's kind of tolerable. But and you know what? Again, that's something that you can do when you're really young. But I think when you can afford it, like I'm sure you'd really appreciate when you can afford your own apartment, where you have all of those things in your house. You can tough that up for a time. But yeah. Anyway, good to have you in the comments there, Setsuna. Current cabinet ratings. Well, this kind of ties in partially to the Abe funeral debate happening at the moment. But I mean, look, Kishida is still doing fine. The opposition has no support at the moment. So the government's totally fine. The approval rating 46 and the disapproval rating is 28. But the reason it's going like that is mainly probably two things at the moment. It's not particularly about the handling of the pandemic or the lack of tourists or anything like that. It's mainly to do with another topic I plan to get to. God, how am I going to get through this? Is the uncovering of the amount of links that the Unification Church, otherwise known as the Moonies, I think they've updated their name. They're like the artists. They're like the cult former known as the bad cult. That's now the World Peace and Everyone Be Excellent cult. And totally didn't do all those scams and rip all those people off. Cult is their current name. They found out that there are hundreds of people in the LDP have connections with them, including government ministers, and they've been taking money from them and campaigning, and it looks like they've had some influence. I'll talk about that soon. That's the main thing. The other thing is, of course, Kishida's announced that they're going to have a state funeral, and right now there's less popular than the Olympics. That's 80% disapproval for having a state funeral. People don't want to spend taxes on a funeral for Abe. I'll also talk about that. I think, honestly, that's the sort of call that from the Prime Minister's perspective is the right call to make, even though it's, of course, going to be unpopular. But yeah, the honeymoon is ending. The thing is, we just don't have an opposition to actually take advantage of that, which is a shame. So yeah. Sainted Sir, watched Prey last night. Excellent movie. No cheesiness, and the blending of languages doesn't break the immersion. I agree. Yeah, you put it at 8 also. I definitely do. Anyway, yeah, Sainted Sir, I agree with your rating. It was good, right? I was watching it. I was so set up because it was a Predator sequel, and I had a heightened expectation, and it was straight to streaming. I was like, wow, this can only disappoint. And it was still good with all of that. So I do recommend checking that out. I think I mentioned last week how NHK was covering the mystery of why there are no tourists coming to Japan. Even though Kishida, well, let's be honest, Kishida lied to the G7. He showed up at the G7 and said, hey, Japan's open now, just like all of you guys. And that's totally not true. The way that they opened tourism, but only to, guided government-approved tours, and requiring a PCR on entry and so on. And, when NHK kept covering why aren't the tourists coming back? Why are there only 1,000 people have come back when we were having 30 million tourists a year beforehand? And what will bring them back? And they didn't mention that, the government hasn't really reopened tourism. Even if you want to come in on a tour, there are very few tours, and it's a long process to get approved and to get the visa to be able to come and do it. And most people don't want to come on a tour. They don't, especially on a guided government tour, basically with North Korean style minders, and that's the problem. They never mentioned it, and I don't know if they noticed the backlash. I don't know if they saw my Twitter account, or maybe they just watched Tokyo Tonight. It's possible. No, it's not really possible. But anyway, they did actually decide that they needed to put out a 1-minute explainer where they actually put out a 1-minute video saying, hey, everybody, here are the 3 reasons that tourists are not coming back to Japan. And they explained the first reason is where they used to have just like free, if you had this passport, you could come to Japan as a tourist for 90 days. Now, even if you are from one of those countries where you used to be able to freely come to Japan, now you actually have to go visit the embassy and go and do a bunch of paperwork. And if you're not living near the embassy of the country that you're in, or you don't have a consulate nearby, that makes it really, really hard for people to go and do the paperwork. It's the first reason they gave. The second reason they gave is the PCR to enter is also discouraging for people. You know, they've only got a week's vacation. They're not sure that if they catch COVID, they have to cancel. So that's discouraging, and that's forcing people to wait. I don't know that's such a big factor on tourism, but it is a factor on even Japanese people thinking about traveling. They're worried about not being able to get back in the country. That is a thing. Third thing is, of course, the guided tours. They finally mentioned that. So yes, it looks like they had that, but yeah, they put that out on a video because it looks like there was so much. I mean, that tweet which I said how it looks like NHK doesn't understand why there are no tourists here was probably the most retweeted or liked and commented Twitter tweet I have done, if not ever, like in the last 12 months. Like I got like hundreds of comments on that actually, and a lot of people very upset and frustrated at that. So maybe NHK did actually see that was like that kind of went, you know, mini viral. And NHK did consequently put out a big long explainer on their regular news program and a 1-minute internet video on the internet. I think though, if they were really reacting to, you know, all the backlash at that was coming in the English speaking world, they would have put subtitles on the video. They didn't. They just put it in Japanese. But you know, baby steps, I guess. So yeah. In the comments, Cobras Tenshi, that's like the time last year when the Ministry of Tourism said that tourism went down by 98.3%. Yeah, that's right. Well, it's pointless, right? They cut off all the tourism. It's like my question was, how is there still? And I think it was like 99.3%. I was like, how is there still 0.7% coming in? You know, when even permanent residents couldn't travel, so it was kind of a meaningless number. I agree. But yeah, Cobras Tenshi's mum is in Japan from next Friday. They're not for tourism. It's actually a family emergency. It does count as a tourist visa. That's interesting. Shinjuku Gochome. So an interesting word for the risk of not being able to get back. Kikoku Nami. It's a refugee. But yeah, well, that's definitely the concern for Japanese people. And that's like, for example, for my work meetings in Singapore, there are people who have kids who are worried that if they get COVID or they test positive, they won't be able to come back and do childcare for their kids when they get back. You know, they've arranged temporary in-laws or whatever to look after kids and so on. And so, yeah, for people like that with family commitments, it is a roll of the dice traveling at the moment. And Japan is the only country, or there's only a handful of developed countries that require PCR for entry. And, you know, Kishida actually said, by the way, this week that he will be bringing Japan entry requirements in line with other G7 countries, which implies that they will get rid of the PCR to enter. I mean, at the moment, Japan is like more dangerous than the rest of the world. Japan is the most dangerous country in the world for getting COVID, so it's kind of strange that they're trying to stop all the COVID coming in. It's really in Japan that's more dangerous, and it's out of step with the rest of the world. So that implies that they will be dropping the PCR entry requirement, which will make a big difference for people who are afraid to travel at the moment. But yeah, at the moment, I would love for that to happen before I travel and before I need to come back, because there are people who are going to Singapore where we could be there, work will pay for a whole week, but you have to get a PCR within 72 hours. So what people are doing is they are flying in on the Tuesday morning when the meetings start. They're getting a PCR test like straight after they arrive from the airport, so that even if they catch it in Singapore, they'll have the negative PCR test. And they're flying out like on Thursday night. So they're making it so that they're basically trying to minimize their risk. And it's just stupid that Japanese people have to, I mean, let alone how stupid it is for everybody else. But that just illustrates. And it's good that it's affecting Japanese people, because then it will change. But Japan is way out of step at the moment with the rest of the world, and they're pretending that they've opened to tourism. And Kishida saying that Japan was now open was a barefaced, it was a lie. It was a lie. He was trying to balance doing enough so that he could say that Japan was open, even though it was, you know, it was a constructive lie, while at the same time making Japanese feel like he hadn't opened the floodgates to disease, when it turned out Japan was the source of most of the disease at the moment. So yeah, but now it looks like he's actually getting the signals, and he is going to change the rules. So that is some good news with that anyway. Quentin Rankin cut off all the tourism. Does this mean less foreign currency coming into Japan? There's almost no foreign currency. I wonder what this does to the exchange rate. Well, ironically, see, this is the other thing. The exchange rate is wonderful. Even though it's gone down, it went as cheap as 140 yen to the US dollar. Now it's down to like 130. Now it's up to 132. So, but even then, if you think that the yen is normally 110 to the US dollar, it basically means everything in Japan now is still on a 25% sale to anyone coming from America. But the thing is, you can't come here at the moment unless you're coming here on a work thing. But I know people have come over for work and they've said, wow, everything in Japan is so cheap right now. And I said, yeah, the yen's like, at that time, 140, it was like 30% devalued. So not only is the yen going down because there's no tourists, but also investment funds have been pulling out of Japan because they feel like it's too much trouble. They can't find people to go and work in Japan from these global investment funds because, who would want to be trapped here? It could appear to be a bit like China to some people at the moment overseas, and it's causing not just tourist money, but capital to leave. In fact, there was a fund, Elliott Investments, that I was involved in setting up actually, and they've pulled out, and they were a significant investment fund. So it's kind of funny. The yen is cheap, everything is on sale, and no one can come and take advantage. Japan should be getting rich off that. David Guzman, any status on the Wishma trial? There is actually. I didn't include it in the topics, but on the Wishma is the name of the Sri Lankan woman who had medical issues while being detained at immigration detention in Nagoya, and she requested medical treatment and was basically told by the detention guards, the immigration detention guards, to go away, leave them alone, sleep it off or whatever, and she died. She actually was coughing up blood. She actually was showing symptoms. And she was refused medical treatment, access to medical treatment, and she died. And to me, that's manslaughter. That's straight up clear, at least gross negligence leading to death, which is what you call manslaughter. And you could argue it's constructively, it could be constructively murder if it's clear enough that, it was beyond negligence. And yet prosecutors have decided not to prosecute. So yes, just this week there is news. David Guzman, the family, is appealing. In the end of the day, prosecutors decided not to investigate the immigration detention center over wrongdoing, over her death, and they are actually formally appealing now their decision not to prosecute the immigration detention. I mean, it's ironic. It's run by the Ministry of Justice. Immigration is part of the Ministry of Justice in Japan. So effectively, the Ministry of Justice has decided not to investigate itself for murder. And this is, I mean, it's constructively killing this woman. I hope that the family is successful. It's outrageous that the case was not prosecuted. And it seems like, that even the government was just hoping that the family would give up and go away. And good on them for continuing to fight. Dan H., am I going to talk about the lonely report about foreigners living in Japan that speak fluent Japanese versus those who didn't? I am now. Okay, I haven't even got to talk about Taro yet. You can see my tweet there, which he I'll get to it. Okay, yes, there is a poll that found that of foreigners living in Japan, 60% of foreigners that do not speak Japanese or that are not fluent in Japanese feel lonely. Whereas if you speak Japanese fluently, was this poll, 44% feel lonely. Which struck me as, and you know what, I must admit, for the people who are learning Japanese in Japan, there is a feeling that, oh, if I just try really hard and I learn Japanese, it'll all get better. And for it gets like 1/3 better, it would seem, by that poll result. But, fact is, it doesn't, it's not a key, this is something I've done videos on this. If you look at my old videos on the channel, fully naturalizing, being accepted as a local, being able to be fluent and proficient enough at working in Japanese companies is not the key to the Emerald City. It doesn't get, in fact, in some ways it gets worse. In some ways you don't get the diplomatic immunity that you might get if you didn't speak Japanese. You're actually treated by a harsher standard in many ways. So, and it's often just as hard to form social connection. Obviously, it's better that it is easier to socialize with Japanese people and to make Japanese friends, but Japan is not an easy country for Japanese people to make friends. And like some people pointed out when I tweeted that tweet, a lot of people pointed out, hey, I think a lot of Japanese people are probably lonely as well, probably in a similar percentage actually. And there was no information. Obviously, the whatever the source of the poll was, it was only surveying foreign residents. I guess it was a good reminder. A lot of people come to Japan hoping that it will solve their problems, where they'll feel like, they're not really adjusted where they live, and if they go to Japan, it'll be better. Might be true for some, but generally speaking, just being in Japan isn't going to fix problems, and just learning Japanese is not going to necessarily fix things. I mean, it makes it better, no question. I mean, obviously, you're going to be living in a bubble of foreigners if you don't speak Japanese, or Japanese who speak English, whereas that's going to be slightly bigger if you can have access to make Japanese friends, and that was the case for me. But it still doesn't change the fact that it's really tough to make close Japanese friends, particularly the way that Westerners, as speaking as a culturally Western person, the way that you have closer friends and relationships, and I think it's pretty common. I moved around a lot, so I didn't really have this so much growing up, and maybe this made me more resilient, and maybe it's part of why I've survived in Japan for longer. But I think a lot of foreigners that I see here are used to having close friends that they hang out with all the time, that they rely on. And you don't have it's very hard to get Japanese friends like that to the extent that people in New Zealand or Australia or UK or America are used to having close friends. So I think that's definitely, as part of it's definitely just Japan. But it also surprised me a little bit. It's not like, well, 60% feel lonely, 44% still feel lonely. So it doesn't get that much better. It's an interesting poll result, and I can only interpret it just that, I think it reflects the toughness of Japan in general. I thought that was an interesting poll result. So Dan H, thank you for flagging that. Lots of comments today. I love this, actually. I'm perfectly happy to keep doing this. Auntie Liana in Yokohama, great to have you in the comments. We residents suffering. Hi, hello, Hiko. Good evening. Hi, all. Yes, good to see you, Auntie Liana. Couldn't rank it. Do the guards have an obligation to provide medical care? Well, no, they don't have to be doctors. But, if you see someone bleeding and, again, this is what the debate obviously has to be, but I do think that if you are detaining someone, and I think this applies to a prison, it applies to a police box, it applies to anything, and someone has a medical emergency, you have an obligation to, they're in your care. They are not free to go and seek medical care for themselves. So if you are detaining them, then you are responsible for ensuring that they're medical, that they, you are responsible if you're detaining them to make sure that they have access to food, that they have access, that they are treated humanely. I mean, part of humane treatment is surely access to emergency medical care. When she was actually bleeding from her nose and, hemorrhaging and having a brain hemorrhage and showing signs of that, I think, and those people are keeping her under lock and key and denying her when she asked for medical help, that they didn't seek medical help for her. I would say that they do have an obligation. I think that's a situation where they're actually, got her restrained, and they're denying. I mean, I think that's the situation anywhere, between whether you're in the back of a police car, whether you're in, she was not free to get help for herself. She was dependent upon those guards, and they've got a duty of care, obviously, to the people that they're detaining. So I would say, look, the Japanese government seems to have concluded by default that they weren't under such an obligation, which is just ridiculous. But we'll see. Was hiring those guards negligent? Oh, I see. Yeah. Was hiring those guards negligent? Well, I don't know. Does it go all the way to the top? I don't know. But the fact that right now that nothing's being done is just ridiculous. And whether it's a problem with the procedural manuals, the thing is, I can't believe that it was okay for this immigration detention center, that there weren't manuals and playbooks and trainings and rules that said that you had to provide medical care if it was needed. So it's an outrageous case, and I really hope that the family does get the justice that they clearly need and deserve for that. Next story, I will go to it. Taro Kono, when I was going through the cabinet appointments, two real big stories for me from the new cabinet. There was a cabinet reshuffle. Actually, there were a couple of stories. There was the fact that Kishida was doing an audit of Unification Church, so people supported, or with links to the Unification Church, and the fact that most of the people receiving support were from the Abe faction, which is the most dominant faction, which can basically push Kishida out at any time. It looked like an opportunity for Kishida to get rid of Abe people using the cult links, pardon me, as an excuse. It turned out that's not really what happened. The balance of different LDP factions was pretty much still the same as it was before. In fact, For those of you who think that, for all these polls that point out gender equality and gender participation and representation in Japanese politics as being inadequate, well, apparently Kishida thinks it's fine because he reduced the number of women in cabinet from 3 to 2. In fact, even the minister in charge of promotion, the advancement of women, and the fertility issue was the woman in charge of that post was replaced with a 41-year-old man who has no children, which drew some attention. Which I think is not to say that, hey, not to say that he can't do it just because he's a man, but it does show that, obviously. It's like being the minister in charge of English when you don't speak English, right? So there was that. There was the women representation issue and just how dire that continues to look. But of course, the other big one that I thought was interesting was Taro Kono out after challenging Kishida and losing the PM election race and being consigned to the wastelands of LDP PR. And basically just having fun on Twitter for months and months. He's now back into a government post. And the thing with Taro Kono is that they keep putting him in government posts. Like they put him in posts like for the pandemic or for administrative reform of the bureaucracy, which no one wants, because everyone assumes that you're just going to get fried, you're going to get destroyed. It's a role where either you succeed and the prime minister looks good, or you fail and the prime minister looks good because he's your rival. So it's a place where they put you to destroy you. And they've brought him back and they've made him the digital minister. So what's the digital minister? The digital minister is a bit like the administrative affairs, the administrative reform minister. They're a minister who's in charge of not so much digitizing all the things of Japan, but they are in charge of, at least for now, in the long run, it's a brand new ministry and it may become in charge of regulating big tech and IT companies and stuff like that. But for now, their role is digitizing government, improving the IT status of the Japanese government. And as a guy who made a corner post of his campaign as administrative reform to get rid of fax machines and hanko stamps for contracts and stuff like that, and faced fierce opposition from the bureaucracy for being so proactive and trying to actually do his job and make their jobs a hassle. Yes, so when he was appointed the digital minister, which arguably encompasses the same responsibilities, but even more than that, it's about, building, it's basically making sure that you can do most of your paperwork via the internet, that you can use apps. You don't actually have to show up at the city council and have 5 printings of paper and everything with a hanko on it and fax, only submit by fax, which there are still tons of things like that. And he was making fun of how they're still faxes and so on, and was getting did a campaign to get rid of them, which was like pissing everyone off inside the Japanese government, saying, hey, faxes are actually pretty good. So yeah, I made a joke. I put a post up on Twitter saying, lock up your fax machines and hide your hankos. Taro Kono looks like he's going to be the new digital minister. And I actually called him Taro Kono Taro because I like to make fun of him. And the fact that he insists so strongly that everybody calls him by Kono first, and he even puts it in all caps. So I compromised by putting his first name before and after his surname. And he retweeted me. Oh, and I don't have the retweet. I don't have the retweet here. But he retweeted me. Oh, come on. I've got to be able to show this. Oh, it's not showing properly. Okay, I will go back to the app. And anyway, he retweeted me saying that, you betcha, I'm going to be getting rid of all the faxes and the hankos, so look out, we're going to be changing the Japanese government. And by the way, it's Kono Taro. He called me out for my name order. He didn't actually see that I said it like before and after, but yeah, it's kind of shocking that the digital minister retweeted me. He retweeted actually a couple of other people that I follow as well, and more or less the same thing, just announcing that yes, a new sheriff's in town. And he actually even soon after tweeted that no, Japan is not an analog country. We are highly advanced in digital. Oh, wait a minute, my fax machine is jamming. He put out a tweet like that after. I mean, and this is why people like him. This is why I like him. I mean, he's Western educated. He's got a good sense of humor. He's actually quite good at English. He's actually quite good at using Twitter. I mean, he's a good communicator. He's an eccentric. Now, yes, he's part of the LDP. They are a den of jackals. To the extent that anyone can be good or interesting in the LDP. I mean, let's face it. There's not a lot of material or a lot of competition to be good or interesting. But I find he's endearing. Something like this, I find personally, just not just the fact that he retweeted me personally, but the fact that he reacts like this at all, that he speaks like this, he messages like this, I find to be endearing. And he's saying the right things and he gets results. No one was happy when he was minister in charge of the pandemic on the vaccination program, but he did get results. No one was, it was a job where it's impossible to please, but I think it's a really great appointment. And again, it's an appointment that either he fails and Kishida looks good, or he succeeds and Kishida looks good. I think it was a smart move by the Prime Minister. I'm really looking forward, as someone who works in tech, I'm really hopeful that he will actually do what he does and deliver to the point of driving everybody crazy. I hope he stays in the role long enough to be able to do that. So I thought that was cool. And on the name order thing, I've talked for a long time about how, yes, I think when you're in English, you should follow the name order in English. The problem is that because when I say my name in Japanese always confused which is the first name and which is the last name. And if I try to use the Japanese naming convention, they try to flip it back, and everyone's always confused. And Taro Taro points out that in China and Korea, they actually enforce a last name first in English standardization, and Japan should be the same. It's a similar Asian culture. And Japan should be treated with the same respect as China and Korea. I don't think it's a problem of respect. I think it's actually genuinely confusing to people, and I do think that you should follow the conventions of the language that you're in. Because again, it's how can people know what the convention is if you don't know the culture? But that said, if I'm taken down by the digital minister directly and he directly tells me to call him Konotaro, I feel like now I've got to call him Konotaro. So I guess I'm going to do that from now on. Shinjuku Gochome, Kono Taro campaigned a lot for trilingual Uyghur-born female candidate Eri Arfia. She wasn't elected, but it was refreshing to see someone so diverse from the LDP. Well, that's it. He's foreign educated. And yeah, I actually think he's a character. He is not in a significant faction. He's got no real power base. He sort of is literally going off just getting good results and being an interesting character. But yeah, I find him interesting. Wow. God, how am I going to get through this? I mean, LDP, talking about him there, he's set to renew the fight against old tech in Japan, and good luck to him on that. I did a review on this channel, not so much a review, I haven't actually posted a proper review yet, but I did a comparison of all my cameras. I did 5 cameras at the same time, so you can see what this camera looks like against my other cameras. The Unification Church, I had a bit of an online discussion about the Unification Church sort of audit that's happening at the moment. Basically, it's right. I don't like cults. I said last week, but I do think that we should be establishing what we think is wrong. There's a funny thing with the Unification Church, that as much as people associate them with scams and culty stuff and so on, they've never been criminally prosecuted, and this is in spite of 34,000 complaints to the Consumer Affairs Commission about scams that they've been involved in. And there's been there are some response in articles that basically police have refused to investigate them because they don't want to be seen as harassing a religious group that is sensitive in Japan. But 34,000 complaints, now that in itself doesn't signify that they're again, they haven't been convicted once, at least not since the 1990s. So I don't know that we can be like just doing an audit just to find this one cult. I think you should still be establishing what the cult does that's wrong, and if they have done wrong, prosecute them, not just tar and feather everybody for the association. But clearly that's kind of what's happening. As someone who clearly can't read the room, I mean, it goes without saying, apparently in South Korea, the Moonies decided to have their own funeral for the Prime Minister, for the former Prime Minister Abe. And Trump sent a eulogy to the Unification Church funeral in South Korea. I mean, basically the reason that he was murdered was association with a cult in Korea. And when there's a funeral, Trump sends his eulogy to the cult funeral for him, which is I guess what you would expect. I mean, without going into all the other stuff happening with him at the moment. And yeah, it turns out there's a surprising amount of influence. And look, to the extent that the Moonies are politically active and that they have an agenda, they are, basically extreme conservatives. They are extremely anti-communist. That comes from the Korea thing, but they're also extreme anti-LGBT recognition. And there's some people saying, hey, maybe they've paid for enough influence to be able to push back, where prefectures and cities in Japan are recognizing LGBT weddings, as has happened in Taiwan. The reason why hasn't the national government recognized, and there are groups within the LDP that are staunchly against this and are blocking progress on this, and it turns out those people are often from factions which are receiving direct money and support from the Unification Church. So maybe they are buying influence in the Japanese government that's affecting policy. So people are starting to look at this, but again, any group is allowed to donate to the LDP, and any group's allowed to lobby, and people in the LDP are allowed to agree with them. I mean, there can be, the Rotary Club, it can be a volleyball team, and it can be the Moonies. And unless you can establish that the Moonies really are like a Yakuza, criminal syndicate, which 34,000 complaints to the Consumer Commission about being scammed and ripped off and deceived and so on might indicate that they are, but no one's ever actually prosecuted them. So I feel like doing a witch hunt. The order is wrong. They should be going through all these religions and actually like prosecuting them properly and enforcing the law against them first, and then do the witch hunt. But that's what's happening at the moment. That's partly why the Prime Minister is not so popular right now. And final story, 40% of lawyers have seen judges sleeping during trials. To which I responded, I have seen lawyers sleeping during negotiations that I've been involved in, where I was not trying to put them to sleep as a strategy, and I was actually really upset that the representation that a client was depending upon, that a customer of mine, got an expensive lawyer, and the lawyer, I don't know, maybe they had a late night or whatever, but they were sleeping when we were going through the contract. And they were charging, like, I know what their rates are. And it was like hundreds of dollars per hour. And it was a single lawyer, and he was asleep during the meeting. I've seen lawyers go to sleep in meetings. And I think that's just as bad. There's just a thing in Japanese culture. People like to sleep a lot during important meetings, which is wrong. And it's certainly bad for a judge to be asleep during a trial. But, the judges in Japan, that's a whole other discussion as well. They're basically nominated bureaucrats. Those are all the topics I had to race through at the end there. Dan H., I don't like cults, yet is the head of a cult of people who like Japanese news. Well, this is a new religion. It's not a cult. It's completely different. So yes, thank you for that, Dan H. Crit rank and take a course in hypnosis, and you can win every case. Yeah, well, better call Hiko. One more episode to go. That is a great, great, great TV show. I am enjoying that very much. Thanks, everyone, for the comments this week. Believe in yourself. I find myself reminded of the reason I became the chair of the Finance Committee and sat in the board of directors, first as a secretary, then president, to deal with the fear resulting. The Moonies are back indeed. Yes. So look, thanks everybody. Wonderful comments tonight. I really do appreciate the participation. Good to see Black Tengu, a representative from Greece, in there, as well as everybody else who left a comment. And have a good week. Stay safe. Follow me on Twitter. Remember to like the video. I really do appreciate it. That really does help if you do that. So please leave a like if you like the video, or even if you didn't like, honestly, please leave a like. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed. Take care of yourselves. I'll be back 10:30 p.m. same time next week, so I've got nothing better to do. Boom. Peace. I might pop up a video during the week with more detail about the new webcam, but what do you think about the webcam? I quite like the webcam. Anyway, hit the like button. See you later. Peace. Extreme. See ya.